Astrocast. I'm your host, Roo. Today is Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. We are at New Moon. It's actually quite a nice new moon for once. I don't think I can remember the last time New Moon rolled around and we had clear skies in Charlotte, but that is indeed what we had last night, and you better believe I took full advantage because it was just absolutely beautiful outside. I love this time of year. It's a really special time of year if you've been into astronomy for a while, like myself. And if you're new to astronomy, then this is going to be a awesome time for you as well, because you've got a lot to look forward to. We've talked about the changing of the seasons in astronomy before, and this is kind of a perfect time to touch on it again and just explain why and what makes this such a special time of year for astronomers. It's the first time in a long time that you can start waking up early and seeing some of the winter constellations come out. So, for example, last night I was out shooting some of the summer targets still. I suppose you could call them late summer, early fall targets, depending on how picky you want to get. But I was shooting a target in Cepheus last night, and luckily for me, it had a good 6 hours before meridian flip when I started. So I basically set my telescope up, and actually it wasn't Cepheus, it was in Cassiopeia, because the target was the ghost of Cassiopeia. And I had set my telescope up around probably 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, maybe a little bit earlier. Maybe it was closer to 10. I was just after dark last night. And another great thing is it's starting to get dark earlier, which you may or may not notice. We haven't technically gotten to the autumnal equinox, which is when days, I think that's when they truly start getting shorter, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check on that real quick. Okay, sorry. So I had a little bit of a brain fart there. The name literally tells you what it means. It's Greek for equinoxes. So it is the time of year when the day is equal. So 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. So it indeed has been getting darker earlier than we've been accustomed to all summer, as I'm sure all of you have noticed. But this is the date that we're going to get to very soon, where night actually starts lasting longer than daytime. So this year it falls on September 22nd. And it can vary a little bit actually from year to year. But this year it's September 22nd, and it generally will fall between September 21st and 24th every year, depending on the Earth's position. So anyway, with the fall equinox on its way, that brings with it the winter constellations. And if you are new to astronomy, you may or may not know that is when the most popular target of astrophotography comes into the sky. It's extremely prominent. And of course, I am talking about M42, the Orion Nebula. So if you get up about, I'd say 3:30 in the morning now, it's probably risen above your trees. And by the time it's 5 a.m., which is when I got up this morning, it's pretty high up in the sky. It's very much in your line of sight if you happen to look south. So it's a special time because for me, it's just really cool watching the constellations change as the years go by. And it's almost like seeing an old friend that you haven't seen in a long time, and they're coming back around again. And that's just kind of the feeling that I always get whenever Orion comes back around. And I always picture the winter constellations as kind of a painting in my mind. And the more winter constellations that you learn, the easier it is to kind of picture this in your own head. And I'm sure any of you that are listening that do know most of the winter constellations kind of know exactly what I'm talking about, because it really does almost appear like a coliseum before you when you're looking up at Orion and Taurus fighting one another. And Taurus is, guarding the seven sisters of the Pleiades. And then you have the twins in Gemini watching from above. And It's just a really awesome sight. And with that awesome sight comes lots of really great targets to shoot in the winter as well. And one of the coolest things about the winter constellations is that you've got targets of all different sizes. So, whether you want to shoot ultra wide field, and I'm talking like, 14 millimeters, and you can shoot the, entire Orion constellation and Barnard's Loop and everything around it and get an incredible photo of that if you're in very dark skies, all the way to, very long focal length stuff, including the planets, because we also noticed that, Jupiter and Mars are back around, Saturn's up, even earlier in the night. And we even have Venus becoming an evening star. And in fact, I want to mention something. If you happen to be listening on release date this week, right after sundown tonight, Wednesday, 9/3, and I'll actually try to put this episode up a little bit earlier than normal. I can't swear that it'll be up in time, but if you happen to be listening to this and the sun isn't completely down yet, you might want to go outside and see if you can find a low western horizon, because we're actually going to have a very, very slim 1 to 2% crescent moon, and it'll be within 4 degrees of Venus. So you'll be able to get an incredible shot if you, get a, 85 millimeter, probably a 135 would be able to get these two together right now. In fact, I'm sure it would, because that's such a tiny field of view, and to be able to get both of those together on a low horizon, maybe you could get some trees in there. You could do it just after sundown when Venus is really shining on the horizon. That's one of my favorite times to capture her. And it's a really cool shot. It's a rare opportunity. So I would highly encourage anyone who has the ability to tonight to go check it out. Thursday, it will also be visible, but not quite as close as it will be on Wednesday night. So if you miss it Wednesday and you still have the opportunity, I would still encourage you to go check it out on Thursday night as well. So anyway, I was shooting the Ghost of Cassiopeia, and I was having a great time. And in fact, it's been, I guess 2 weeks now that we've had a lot of clear skies. Not every night, but a lot of nights. So you can tell it's getting to be fall for that reason as well, because in the Carolinas anyway, we tend to have much clearer weather throughout the cooler months. And while we still get, some of those occasional 90 plus degree days, today, for example, was, in the 60s. By the time we got off of work, it was nice and cool out. There was a breeze. We took the dogs for a walk, and just very, very enjoyable weather. So it's another reason why it makes this time of year special, is because it's so nice outside, depending on where you are. Obviously, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's a little bit different heading into summertime, but in the Northern Hemisphere, it's quite comfortable outside. And if you're lucky, you'll get, a month, maybe 2, where you can go out in the evening with short sleeves and maybe just a light jacket. It's a perfect time to visit your local astronomy club if you have not done that yet. I would highly encourage anyone, if you're in the Charlotte area by chance, the Charlotte Amateur Astronomers Club is an amazing club that I am very proud to be a member of. The observatory director there, Rick, is an awesome guy and friend of the show. He's actually been interviewed on the show, and he would tell you that it's the best $60 a year that you'll ever spend. It's cheaper than Netflix, and you'll get a ton more entertainment out of it. It's a great time because star parties will be happening, obviously, and people tend to come out a little bit more as it's cooler out. And what else is awesome is the Milky Way is still visible. So while it's starting to cool off, and obviously, once it's sundown, the Milky Way is pretty much directly overhead when we get to astronomical darkness right now. Astronomical darkness, for those of you who may not know, is when the sunlight is no longer impacting Earth's atmosphere in any way, and we have true darkness outside. Another thing about getting into winter is we have a longer period of astronomical darkness than we do in the summertime. In fact, in the summertime, in a lot of places, you only get about 4 hours of astronomical darkness. And that's not even, way up north in the, polar areas, but actually down here in North Carolina in July, you only get a little over 4 hours of true total darkness, which is hard to believe, but it's absolutely true. And if you've ever been to Bortle 1, Bortle 2, or even Bortle 3 site, you've probably been able to notice how much that light impacts you. If you're in a more light polluted city like I am in Charlotte, I mean, it's so gray and hazy on the horizon that you probably wouldn't notice the difference. But if you're at a truly dark site, you can really see that fading sunlight for, quite a bit of time. And if you're lucky, you might even see zodiacal light as it fades away. So if you head out to your local astronomy club, you'll notice that there's more people than usual, especially if you go at new moon, if they're having a star party, for example, just because it's a lot cooler out and more comfortable. People like to come out more when it's nice out, obviously. And like I said, the Milky Way is still visible. And if you plan on doing an all-nighter like I often do, you'll be very lucky to see the Pleiades rise, around 2, 3 a.m. And then shortly after, Orion will follow. And of course, Taurus in between the two. And like I say, you got Jupiter and Saturn right there right now too. So it's just a awesome view. And if you haven't yet, get out there and look, because it's a great time of year to do it. It's a great time of year to make a dark skies trip. If you didn't get a chance to do one over the summer, maybe the weather held you back, maybe work held you back. Maybe you can think about at our next new moon, taking a little trip out like I plan to do. I'm hoping to go up to the mountains for a couple of nights in the near future and just enjoy some peace and quiet up there and some very dark skies. So anyway, getting back to what I was saying earlier, I had set up my telescope last night, and it was actually my Rokinon 135 rig, which I had set up with the L-Extreme F2 filter, which is a dual narrowband filter. And I had pointed it at the Ghost of Cassiopeia, and there's another small nebula. It might be the Pac-Man Nebula. Forgive me, I can never remember which one that is. That's right in the region there. So I went ahead and framed that up. And it was starting to get late, and I knew I had a big day at work today. What I generally will do in those situations, if I don't have a meridian flip to worry about, and if you don't know what a meridian flip is, if you're very, very new to astronomy, I'll just briefly explain. The type of mounts that we use for astrophotography are called equatorial mounts. And what makes them special is that they are able to travel in what is called the right ascension axis. And very simply put, right ascension is basically the movement of the stars in the night sky. So if you were to sit there for an hour and watch the same star, you would notice the direction that it is moving in, and that direction is right ascension. So obviously, when we're taking photographs of stars, we need to be able to, track the same star for sometimes hours at a time. And at some point, that star will cross what is called the meridian, which is, basically an imaginary line that goes from north to south. So if you can just picture that. So if you know most telescope setups, you probably know that there's a counterweight on one side, and then you have your telescope and imaging train on the other side. And if you can picture a telescope rotating until it is looking straight up towards what we call the zenith, which is when you look directly overhead, it would get to a point where if it rotated any further, that counterweight would actually get above the telescope. And that's a dangerous thing because the weight can get off balanced and your whole rig can tip over, et cetera, et cetera. You generally don't want to image very far past the meridian. And luckily for us, most modern computer programs that we use for imaging, like the ASI Air or Nina, if you use that on the computer, they have built-in automatic meridian flips. So basically, your mount with your telescope on it, when it gets to close to the meridian, and you can program it to say exactly how close you want it to get, it will automatically flip the telescope back over the other way so it can then travel down the western part of the sky unimpeded without having to worry about that counterweight. So anyway, I say all that to tell you, last night when I had set up to image the Ghost of Cassiopeia, it was a good 5 hours at least before the meridian flip. And being that I knew I was going to be able to leave my telescope alone for 5 hours, I said, let me check the weather report and make sure that there's zero chance for rain. And there wasn't. So I actually set my telescope up in my driveway and I let it run pretty much all night long. I ended up getting 100 3-minute subs. I think it ran till just before 4 a.m. before it stopped. I probably could have gotten a few more subs out of it. I had actually set an alarm for 3:30 a.m. to wake up and go outside and bring my telescope in because I don't like to leave it out all night long. Luckily, we live in a real safe neighborhood and I've never had any trouble. But nonetheless, I don't want to tempt fate. So, if it's really dark out and I have all my cars parked behind the telescope, you can't really see it from the road very easily. So I don't really have a problem. I got a camera on it that'll yell at me if somebody happened to walk into the driveway. It'll get announced over my smart home assistant, Alex, and I can run outside in my underwear like a crazy person and shout at them. But anyway, I felt comfortable leaving it outside. I've done that a couple of times before, kind of in anticipation of the observatory build that I'm going to be doing soon. And yeah, it was great. So my alarm didn't go off at 3:30 in the morning, though. That's the only thing. It was kind of hilarious. I woke up and I looked at my phone. It was 5 a.m. I woke up, I had to go to the bathroom, and I was like, why the heck did my alarm go off? And I looked at my phone. It said, you missed your alarm because the volume was only at 9%. I was just laughing at myself. I was thinking, well, why didn't you turn the alarm up or the volume a little bit? I don't think I've ever had my phone say that. I think generally speaking, when you set an alarm, it turns the volume up, but I guess not. So I'll have to check the settings on that to make sure I don't make that same mistake again. So anyway, I got up at 5 a.m. I walked outside to see how everything was. The telescope had gotten just to the meridian and then stopped. So I guess, that's when it had gotten its 100 subs, which was perfect because, I didn't need it to do a meridian flip while I wasn't there. That is one thing that most astronomers will tell you until you are extremely familiar with your gear. And hopefully you have all the wires properly routed to where it's impossible for you to get a cable snag. You would never want to let a meridian flip happen without watching the telescope, because unfortunately, it could snag a cable and then your right ascension motor could burn out if it just keeps trying to move and it can't. And, all sorts of bad stuff can happen. So generally speaking, right now with my setup, if I don't have my eyes on the telescope, I will not allow it to do a meridian flip. But again, since I had 5 hours before meridian flip was going to happen and I knew I could get 100 subframes in that time, I decided to go ahead and roll with it. So when I finally did get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and walk outside, I was just blown away by the view because Orion was up. I was able to see Jupiter and Mars. The Pleiades was beautiful. It was just a really great dark new moon morning, which is just the best. So it's just again, a cool time of year because you can really appreciate the end of season Milky Way. You can still see it. If you go to a dark site, you'll still be able to see the Milky Way for several hours before it sets. And then you'll also be able to enjoy those winter constellations coming up if you make it an all-nighter. So definitely plan that dark sky trip if you haven't yet. And if you happen to take some photos or go somewhere really cool, please feel free to drop me a line, rooastrocast@gmail.com. I would love to hear about your travels. In other news, we actually have a few announcements for the show this week. First of all, I would like to welcome our 6th Patreon member to the channel. I want to give a special shout out to
Acererak, not Acererak. Acererak.
Yeah. I think he'll probably get a laugh out of that. He actually emailed me and he goes by a D&D nickname, which is super cool. And I couldn't remember how to pronounce that particular character's name. And I think I botched it because I will always try to always send a video thank you message to anyone who donates to the Patreon. And I botched the name pretty bad in the message. And he actually responded and sent me a pronunciation video. So we got a little inside joke there. So shout out to you, Acererak. Thank you so much for joining. And a big shout out to all of our members, Keaton, David, Carrie, Wiley. Thank you guys so much for being members of the Patreon. And it's really cool keeping up with you guys in our chat and Discord. I think we've been a little bit more active lately. I've been, now that we're finally getting some clear skies, I've been posting more images in there. And I think Acererak's going to breathe some new life into our chats as well. So if you would like to join us in our Patreon members chat, feel free to donate $1 or $5 a month. You can do that at patreon.com/the Astrocast. Thank you so much. In other very cool news, I have actually made my first professional partnership with an astronomy company. And I am quite happy to say it's actually the place that I have shopped at the most over the years. And I'm sure you've heard me talk about them many times on the show before. But if you haven't, by some chance, I'm working with High Point Scientific now, just a part of their affiliate program. I worked very closely with the marketing department, and I guess we're trying to kind of feel each other out at the moment and hopefully start building that relationship to where we can have more of a sponsorship in the future. But I'm very, very happy to be an affiliate with High Point now. You guys know I only recommend places that I would shop myself on the show. And I can tell you High Point is somewhere that I already shop and have bought actually most of my gear over the years from. So I can highly recommend them. If you guys ever do want to purchase something, I'll have a link that I will put in the show notes. And if you go there, it'll help the show a little bit. So if you're ever planning on buying something anyway from High Point, I would greatly appreciate it if you would use the link. That's an excellent way that you can support the show and get awesome gear at very reasonable prices. So that's it for the High Point portion of this week's show. But big thanks to High Point again, and a special thanks to Melissa for working with me. It means a lot to be in a partnership with such an awesome company that I really do look up to in the world of astronomy, because you guys just do awesome work. And I think you do it for very reasonable prices. So thanks again to High Point. So in weird news, I have something to share with you guys. You may or may not know, but I'm a big photographer, just generally speaking, not just astrophotography, but photography in general. I am a very big fan of. I'm actually going to be going and shooting a friend's birthday party over this weekend. And I'm kind of kicking myself because when he reached out to me initially, he said, you know, hey, I'm throwing a birthday party this weekend and I was hoping you'd be my photographer. And he said, you know, I'm happy to pay you. I don't expect any kind of discount or anything. And I said, oh yeah, man, for sure. And, you know, being the guy that I am, I'm not going to charge a friend full price. You know, normally for something like that, it would kind of depend on the situation really, but it kind of sounded like he was just having a get together with some friends. And come to find out, it's not his birthday. It's not his wife's birthday. It's his wife's sister's birthday. And they actually got a giant venue. And yeah, it's a lot bigger and more elaborate than I initially thought it was going to be. And let this be a lesson to you guys if you ever get booked. Don't undersell yourself, and make sure that you get all of the details before agreeing to anything. Now, I'm not upset about it or anything, and I am getting a fair price for a few hours of work, even though the editing is really what gets you. So the on-site shooting is just a few hours. It's from 7 to 10 p.m. But the editing, as you know, if you've ever done any photography, can take a lot longer than 3 hours. But in any case, they ended up hiring a second photographer too, because they want to do a backdrop booth where people can, walk by a backdrop and take a photo. And they initially messaged me and said, hey, do you want me to get a backdrop so you can do those? And, I tried to explain, as nicely as I could that if they want to do that, then I'm going to be stuck shooting backdrop photos all night. Or if you want me to, capture the actual party and the moments that are happening, then I can roam around, but I can't really do both. So they ended up hiring a second photographer just to do the backdrop. And I'm going to guess that person's going to make a whole lot more money than I am on Saturday. So next time I will definitely say, who is this party for, and not assume that the person who is asking is who it's actually for. But anyway, I, again, not upset, always happy to get a little bit of extra money in my pocket by doing photography. The one thing I won't do for photography, though, is weddings. I just absolutely refuse to do them. I've had lots of people ask me over the years, why don't you shoot weddings? There's so much money to be made. I know, believe me, the people that do wedding photography are saints. I could not put up with people being obnoxious and bridezillas and groomzillas and all that kind of stuff. That's not my cup of tea. And the main reason I've done it is because, or haven't done it, is because I do not want the fun to be sucked out of photography for me. But anyway, I brought up photography to tell you guys that I recently got my first film camera. As you may or may not know, I can't remember if I mentioned that on last week's show, but I got my first film camera, and it's a really cool Japanese Pentax camera. It's actually from 1978, and it's a Auto 130. So it's a very, very, very small negative. It's actually about the size of your pinky. So crazy cool camera, incredibly small. And luckily there's a new company that is now making 130 millimeter film camera. And you might hear 130 if you know anything about film photography and think like medium format, like 110, and think, oh, that's got to be big. But no, it's not. It's actually really, really tiny negatives. But anyway, I got that, and it's been super cool. I finished my first roll. I've got 2 more rolls that I want to shoot, and then I'm going to go get them developed. I'm starting to get into film. I never thought that I would be that guy. But I really, really dig the analog feel of film cameras. And when I was younger, I actually did shoot film. So when I was a teenager, it was before digital cameras were a thing. And we would actually, go to CVS or Walmart or Kmart to get our photos developed. And you didn't even have a department store if you didn't have a 1-hour photo in it. So if you went somewhere like a Target or Walmart or Kmart, if they didn't have a 1-hour photo, then they weren't doing, business right, because it was almost a necessity in those days, because that's how all of our photos got developed. Anyway, I love taking pictures, and like many teenagers from my era in the 90s, I had a wall in my bedroom that was completely full of photographs. And the only reason I was able to afford that is because at the time, the local drugstore, it was actually CVS, they sold a disposable camera that was essentially if you bring it back, we will exchange it for a new one. As long as you pay for the development of the film, we'll continue swapping out for new film for free, essentially. So you would use the same camera, but they'd give you a new roll of film every time you brought it back. So I did that for 2 or 3 years with that film camera, that little 35 millimeter cheapo camera. And some of my all-time favorite photos in my albums to this day were taken with that photo. So I definitely have experience with film, but I never had a nice film camera back then. I certainly never had anything like an SLR. And believe it or not, the 130 is actually an SLR. It has interchangeable lenses. They are adorable. They're super tiny. And maybe I can post some photos of the camera so you guys can see it. I've got the 16 millimeter lens, and then I've got the telephoto lens, which is 50 millimeters. But again, with the sensor being as tiny as it is, it's like a crop sensor on crack. So 50 millimeters is actually more like 130 millimeters, if I remember correctly. The owner of the camera shop that I ran into actually told me all about it. He knew all the history of it. And it's actually, on another note, a new camera store here in Charlotte, and they're called the Photo Outfitters. And the owner of the shop, Tony, we actually spent a good bit talking, and I came back a few days later and ended up buying that camera. And I'm actually already thinking about my next film camera and what that's going to be, because ultimately what I would like to do is see if I can do some astrophotography with a film camera. And I know that I can't do like, stacked shots or anything like that, but I was thinking if I could get, really good polar alignment and have an auto guiding camera going and locked onto a target, then I could put a, regular film DSLR into the saddle and then use a intervalometer to take the shutter without touching the camera so I don't bump it. And then do, 30-second, 60-second, depending on, what the guiding's like. There's no reason you couldn't take a ISO, 200 or 400 shot for 3 minutes or longer. You know what I mean? So it's definitely something I'm going to explore. I know that there's a lot more to it than what I just said, but I do think it's doable. And I think ultimately it would be a really cool way to get some neat photographs. So something like a Milky Way shot or maybe the Orion Nebula, something really bright that stands out is going to be the way that you want to go with that, I would imagine. And it's definitely something that I am planning on trying in the near future. So I know I've mentioned on the show over, probably the last 3 months about building this observatory that I've been planning on building in my side yard. And I actually got a little bit closer this week in that I finally found the container that I am going to use to house my Micro-Observatory. So I was thinking about it, kind of like we talked about last week, and I don't want to build like a whole big shed. I basically just want to have a pier and then something to cover the pier and maybe put a little micro PC on the inside and a couple of fans to vent, to prevent mold and that sort of thing. But I don't need enough room to stand inside because I'm not planning on putting, a giant telescope at my house anyway. It would be for, my Rokinon 135 and maybe my 80 millimeter. And I started looking at sheds online. And before long, I got on the Learning Astrophotography Facebook page after I found one that looked pretty reasonable. And I just posed the question like, hey, have any of you guys ever used something like this to build a small observatory? And I was kind of shocked at how many responses I got. I got a ton of people who sent back great photos showing me, how awesome their observatories are that are really small. So we're talking like, in some cases, 3 foot by 2 foot areas. And you really don't need enough room for your telescope to be in the northern star position. Why is it escaping me? The home position. But it just needs to be able to park and close. So that means you can, rotate your telescope sideways and then put the lid on. And then when you take the lid off, you can put it back into the home position, which is more upright, without your right ascension axis on its side. And by doing that, you can end up saving quite a bit of room, actually, like, more than a foot in height. And a lot of the people posted images with these really small sheds. And in fact, I found several between $200 and $400 that look like they are going to be excellent candidates. One, in fact, that really caught my eye. It's a small shed. It's, I want to say 72 inches by 48 inches by 3 feet. And it has a hinged roof on it. So the idea is when you want to take the roof off, you literally just lift it up and it folds all the way back behind the building. And that works perfectly because you don't have to, cut the roof off like I've seen a lot of people have to do when they build these sheds. The roof is already designed from the factory to be removed in that way. And that really takes a lot of the guesswork and, complicated work, frankly, out of building an observatory. So I definitely think I'm going to go with that. And when I was up at 5 a.m. this morning and Orion was already up, I went out into my side yard and had a look. And I did have a very good clear view, clear from the trees, because we got a lot of trees in the southern area of our yard from our neighbors, not our house. I don't have a single tree in my yard, but Anyway, I will be able to put it in the part of the yard which is behind a locked gate, which is very important to me for obvious reasons. And I think ultimately I'll be able to, hook that up with everything I could possibly want. I can already build the pier because I've got the cinder blocks that I'm going to use, like Luco Matico did in his one video. And then I went online and I actually found for about $100, you can buy a really good pier head, essentially like a 8 to 12 inch pier head that has the connection point on it that you can put your mount on. I think since it's going to be a home observatory, I will likely put my CEM 26 out there. I might as well use my nicer mount that can handle more weight. And I know initially I said I was just going to use my Rokinon, but I thought, if I can swap it out and put my, bigger scope on there or my smaller scope, then why not use, the nicer mount so it's got more payload capacity? That's kind of a no-brainer, right? So I may go with I might go with a slightly larger one, being that I know that I have enough room in the backyard to do it now. I haven't decided yet, but I do know that even with the really small ones, people are fitting, Schmidt Cassegrain's large, like Edge HD 9.25s and those sorts of scopes. So much larger than anything that I am currently running or am likely to have within the next year or two. So it'll definitely be plenty of room for me. I'm very excited about that. It's starting to cool off now. So I'm likely going to start building that pier in the very near future. So I can finally have my own home observatory. I pretty much have most of what I need to get started already as far as building the pier. And I know I'll want to have a nice level foundation, which shouldn't be too hard of a problem. I've leveled things before, so I'll probably stake everything out in the next couple of weeks and start leveling out that ground. And then I'll just get some pavement stone. I forget what you call them. The big flat stones, or they'll be the corner of my foundation. Because I'm not going to dig anything into the ground. I'm probably going to sink concrete for the actual pier. But the foundation, which will be, separate from the building, is going to be, not separate from the building. The pier is going to be separate from the building, because if I sink a pier, I will likely cut a hole in the bottom of the building that the pier can go through. So haven't decided, got to work out the details on all those kind of things. A lot of people just set up their tripod, but I would like to have a pier if I'm going to build an observatory, even if it's a small one, just because I want to be able to have something that is always polar aligned perfectly. With, obviously you might have to make some small adjustments occasionally, but generally speaking, the whole point for me is to be able to image at a moment's notice, because it just stinks that, if you get 2 hours of clear skies one night and you're like, it's going to take me half an hour just to get set up. And then if you, God forbid, you run into a problem and it ends up taking you an hour to get set up, by the time you get calibrated and imaging, and your guiding is going, you might already have the clouds rolling in. So it's certainly happened to me many times in the past. And the big advantage of having, a mount and a computer and a telescope that's already polar aligned and ready to go is that you literally just pull the roof off, open up your app of choice, and start imaging. So I cannot wait to do that. Another kind of cool thing to mention that I did over the last week is I got a really weird camera. So there is a device that came out way back in 2017, and I think it was supposed to originally start shipping in 2016, but it never actually happened until 2017 for many various reasons, technical delays. The company was trying to do too much with too little, et cetera, et cetera. And it was basically one of these venture capitalist firms that were looking for investments, and they got a ton of money thrown at them. And they came out with a device called the Light L16. And when it initially came out, it was actually a $2,000 camera that was meant to compete with DSLR and very early mirrorless cameras. The inventor actually, his wife gave him a hard time because he was always carrying around lenses in his pockets or something like that. And he thought, with the technology today, we should be able to make a device that's truly all in one, yada, yada, yada. And what he ended up inventing is a camera that it's got the footprint of about a modern day smartphone. In fact, when I hold it up to my Galaxy S23 Ultra, they're almost the exact same dimensions as far as width and height is concerned. Depth wise, though, it's definitely thicker. It's probably about the thickness of a deck of cards, maybe a little bit thicker than that. And it runs Android, so it's Android 6.0. Excuse me. Got a little bit of a dry throat tonight. Forgive me. Anyway, Android 6.0, and you may be saying, if you know anything about Android, why is it on Android 6.0, Roo? And the reason for that is the company actually went out of business a couple years after they finally shipped their first device. And it's a real shame because I think they were kind of far ahead of their time with what they were doing. Unfortunately, though, as so often is the case, just because you've got a really great idea doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to execute on it. Ask me how I know. I've had quite a few over the years, some of which I've tried quite hard to execute as far as inventions are concerned, but I've yet to get one truly over the finish line. These guys did a lot better than that because they actually did ship the product. But by the time it got around, it had a lot of flaws in the software. It was a kind of buggy device that was missing some very basic features that you would expect on a camera on day one. For example, it could not record video on day one. They eventually did release updated firmware a couple of times, and long story short, the camera can record video now, but its claim to fame is that being called the L16, it has 16 separate lenses and individual sensors on the back of the device. So if you look at it, it looks crazy. It almost looks like a spider with a million eyes looking at you. But if one got mixed with a smartphone, is kind of the best way that I can describe it. If you've never seen one, I would highly recommend just going and Google it, look up Light L16, and you'll see it. And the idea is that you combine a whole bunch of little sensors and then use, computational math to put it all together and kind of digitally render into one large sensor. And the advantage of this is you're able to shoot at a bunch of different focal lengths, optical focal lengths, not digital, which is higher quality, without actually having to swap out lenses. So with it being 16 different sensors on the back, you actually have 4, 8, 12, 16. Yeah, I think it's 4 of each focal length. So there's like a 28, 35, 75, and 150. Forgive me if I'm not naming them exactly, but essentially you can go anywhere from 28 millimeters to 150 millimeters. And if you go to one of the sizes in between, like let's say you do, 130 millimeters, it'll actually combine data from all of the lenses to simulate that focal length. Another really cool thing about doing it this way is that you can actually select your aperture after the fact in the software that it came with. So you would download the computer software onto your PC or Mac, and you would plug the device into your PC. And when you did that, it actually gave you the option to adjust from f2.0, which is a very good aperture. If you know photography, it's very wide. It lets in a lot of light, even with a small sensor like these had, but it had a bunch of them. So it was able to collect a lot of data, and you could go all the way up to f22. So if you wanted to have, a really sharp photo that was sharp in all areas of the photo, you could adjust it all the way up to, f20. And in practice, what this led to was, first of all, extremely large file sizes. On average, they were, I think, 58 megapixel raw files that were over 100 megabytes each. I know that I took like 10 photos the other day, and it was over a gigabyte of information just on those 10 photos, which is kind of crazy. But some of the photos that I've seen people take with this have been really, really cool. So of course, when I saw it, I thought to myself, man, this $2,000 device, and it's only going for $130 on Amazon. And that was what caught my eye so much, because where else are you going to get a $2,000 camera for $130 brand freaking new? So I was willing to roll the dice on it, even with all of the issues that I had heard about. And I knew that you would have, zero company support if something went wrong because the company is no longer in business. But I'm a pretty smart tech savvy guy. And if you are too, and if everything that I just said sounds interesting to you, you could certainly check it out. And I'll leave a link for them in the show notes. It's not an affiliate link or anything like that. But if you're interested in getting one, you can pick it up. Like I say, these are new in box. So they must have been leftover stock that Light had after they went bankrupt. And Amazon somehow got their hands on them. So to get a $2,000 camera from a few years ago, well, I guess 2018 is now 6 years ago, but for $130 is pretty wild. And when I got it, the thought was astrophotography, actually, because I thought to myself, I wonder if our Samsung Galaxies and iPhones can get, fairly respectable photos of the Milky Way. If you take your time and stack them properly and use an equatorial mount. I was wondering if I could do the same thing with this device. And I can't swear it off for certain, but I did take it out this morning and do a few, just set it on top of the roof of the car and snap a 15-second wide angle shot. And I did use the 300 rule to make sure that I wasn't getting to streaky stars, yada, yada, yada. That's a different story. But it did not look great. Just to be honest with you, it didn't look great at all. And it didn't even come close to the quality that I saw from the Galaxy S23. So I am going to run a few more tests. I haven't given up by any means. It does look like, unfortunately, the longest shutter time that you can do is 15 seconds. There's no bulb mode that I've been able to find in the software. And surprisingly, there is no mod community for this online that I've been able to see. I thought for sure with a device like this, as quirky as it is, that there would have been an Android modification community out there for, people building custom software and firmware for it to do other things, since it is such a unique device. But it doesn't appear that there is anything like that out there. If you know of any custom firmware, custom software, et cetera, feel free to drop me a line at rooastrocast@gmail.com, because I'd love to know about it. But I think that they had some pretty weird proprietary software that stitched all of these photos together. And ultimately, that was kind of the big critique of this device. Because you got to remember, in 2017 and 2018, when this device came out, we were well past, good quality smartphone cameras, and they were able to upload, directly from your phone after taking the photo. Now, this would definitely get much better photos than a smartphone in 2018, but you have to go home, you have to load it into their kind of buggy software and Windows. Then you got to, adjust your f-stop. And most people just have no patience to do that sort of thing. I'm already a photographer. I'm used to doing that every time I take out a compact flash card or an SD card from my camera. It's just something that I'm used to doing. So it doesn't bother me one bit at all. I personally have not found the software to be as buggy as people make it sound on the Amazon reviews, for example. I think it's decent for what it is. I mean, is it the best software I've ever used? Of course not. But will it get the job done? Yeah, it'll get the job done. So definitely something unique. A cool piece of photography history to own. Kind of just like my film camera. I found a weird old Kodak Polaroid kind of camera also at a thrift store a couple weeks back. So I guess I'm starting to collect quirky, unique cameras, which is something that's just such a me thing to do, I gotta say. So hopefully my wife won't be screaming at me anytime soon. Outside of that, guys, I'd like to take a moment to give a shout out to a fan of the show who wrote to me this morning. I just wanted to say hi to Kenny from Oklahoma. He sent me a very nice email this morning, and we ended up chatting back and forth. He's kind of new to astrophotography. He's still getting his first kind of bits and pieces of equipment. He's got a Canon Rebel T5i and 3 different lenses. He's got 2 kit lenses and then a Rokinon 14 millimeter lens, which is an awesome lens that I also own. And I was telling him, ironically, that's the exact same camera kit that I started with many, many years ago, except he has the I version and I had the regular T5. So he's got a little bit of a hand up on me from where I started. He's also in much darker skies than I am, so I got that to be jealous of as well. But just wanted to give a shout out to Kenny and tell him to keep practicing. I know it can be tough whenever you're first getting started. You might not have as much dough as you want to go buy all the various astrophotography things, but the vast majority of us don't really have it like that, where we can go out and drop thousands of dollars on day one to get into the hobby. And it's probably better that way, because for a few different reasons. One, you're going to appreciate your gear a lot more if you have to save up for it and kind of acquire it piece by piece. I guarantee you will take better care of it. I remember one time about a year and a half ago, I was in my garage and I was working on the Rokinon 135, and I had the new 3D printed mount ring system that's very popular to use with that. So you can hook up the autofocus and all that. Anyway, I didn't screw the screws in, and I thought they had been, and I dropped my brand new 135 lens and my 294 camera onto hard concrete. And I literally almost started crying, but I picked it up and saw somehow it looked unscathed. I immediately threw that lens on the camera and started taking pictures. It was fine. And then finally I plugged back in the 294 into the lens, and it was also fine. So I really dodged a bullet. And ever since that has happened, I always take a lot of extra special care when handling gear. That's something I could recommend to anyone. Just pay extra special attention when you're messing with stuff. Particularly if it involves, $1,000+ gear, even something as simple as, like, yesterday, I have a table that has a lot of, my camera gear on it, like a couple cameras, couple lenses, those sorts of things. And I was putting some tools up, and I was going to temporarily set a hammer down. And I had set it on that table, and then I looked at the glass right beside it. And then I was like, this isn't an appropriate place for a hammer next to these lenses, even though it wasn't touching them. And, I likely wouldn't bump into it or anything. I don't need to have a hammer near my expensive glass. So I just put it away where it should have been, which is nowhere near camera glass. So anyway, I say all that to encourage you to keep going, Kenny. Have a look around. Websites like Cloudy Nights, as we discussed, are excellent for classifieds. If you need lenses, KEH.com, MPB.com, those are great places to get, buy, sell, trade lenses. I've personally bought a couple of lenses, one from MPP and one from KEH. Both my Rokinon 14 millimeter, and then which other lens? Honestly, I can't remember. I've got a lot of camera lenses, but another one I brought from KEH, one from MPB, one from KEH, and I had great experiences with both of them. So I can highly recommend those websites. Of course, if you're looking for new gear, you can always check out High Point. Adorama is a good site too. There's lots of good places out there that you can shop at, and just take your time, man. Spend your money on your mount. That is where the majority of your money should go. Don't worry about anything else until you get a decent mount for your camera to go on. So if you want to keep using the Rebel T5i for now, that is perfectly fine to do. I suggested something like a Adventurer GTI. He was mentioning to me that he had looked at the Move Shoot Move, and I'm actually hoping to review one of those. I actually emailed the guys over at Move Shoot Move asking if they would send me a unit to review, because I've been watching videos on them and I'm very interested. And I would love to tell you guys about it. So we'll have to wait and see if they respond. Hopefully they will. But I would get that as a secondary device. That's what I will certainly be using it for if I end up buying one. Something for, portable wide field Milky Way shots and those sorts of things. But if you're getting your first mount for astrophotography, even if you're only doing wide field Milky Way stuff, I would still recommend getting something like the GTI, because it's just going to give you so much more room for growth. And while it doesn't have a huge weight capacity at 11 pounds, you can still get pretty much any DSLR or mirrorless camera and any lens on it. And then you can certainly get, a small telescope like a Red Cat along with an astronomy camera. So if you end up, getting a nicer setup down the road, like a 61 millimeter Red Cat, that would go beautifully with the Star Adventurer GTI. And the advantages are just so numerous that I could go on all night, but chief among them, you will have that go-to functionality. And when you're a new astrophotographer, finding targets in the night sky can be very, very challenging, particularly if you are using a DSLR camera, because you gotta manually focus. You don't have an you do have autofocus in a DSLR, but you would use manual focus for the stars. That's a different topic. But you take a 10-second exposure, look at the back of your camera, zoom in on the back of the camera. Is that good enough? I don't know. Whereas if you have a go-to mount, you literally just have to do a 1, 2, or 3 star alignment, which is basically, point it at a star, take a photo of it, and then tell the mount, okay, I'm looking at this star. And then after you do that, it'll know where it is in the night sky, and it can automatically slew to any target that you want from there. And then later on down the line, you can add an ASI Air if you want to even more fully automate things. You can get auto guiding. Not to say you can't do auto guiding with some of the star trackers, like my SkyGuider Pro is capable of auto guiding, but I actually, it's funny. I started with the SkyGuider Pro when I was building my Rokinon 135 rig, and I ended up going to the GTI because of those very same reasons that I just listed. And that was after I was already a fairly experienced astrophotographer. I knew how to polar align. I knew a lot of the targets in the night sky, know how to star hop, those sorts of things, but it was still frustrating. Another thing that frustrated me about the SkyGuider in particular was the counterweight system. I hate the way that thing is built, where you do your polar alignment first, and then you kind of like hang the counterweight bar off of it and you tighten it down, and then you put the ball head on top of that. And I don't like the way that's designed at all. If I'm using it with just a camera and a lens, I don't mind doing that. But if you want to get, more than 5 pounds on there, you got to use the counterweights. And to me, that's kind of a deal breaker. So for literally a couple $100 more, you get so much more with a GTI. So if you end up buying a star tracker, see if you can save up a little bit more and get yourself that GTI, and I promise you won't regret it. So good luck on your adventure, Kenny. And thanks again for emailing me. If any of you guys would like to shoot me an email, please do. I love to hear from you guys. Nothing makes my day quite like hearing from a listener. Anybody who enjoys the show, that it just tells me why I keep doing this show week in and week out. Because I love hearing from you guys, and I hope that I teach you a thing or two every episode. I know that, sometimes we'll have episodes where we cover very specific topics, and then other times we'll have episodes like this where we kind of just chat for an hour and catch up and talk about various astronomy stuff. Personally, those are my favorite episodes. I love the just sit down and chat about the stars for an hour. I know that when I was looking for a podcast before I started the Astrocast, that's the kind of show that I was looking for. Who knows what it'll grow into over the coming years. I do think that we're going to be here and we're going to stick around. I am almost 1 year into making the show now. So in about 3 months, it's going to be a full year, and we'll see what happens when we get to that point. But we got more people listening, which is awesome. I can say I would love if you guys would share this show with any friends that you have that are into astronomy or astrophotography. Perhaps you just have friends who like good podcasts. So if they might be a little bit interested, feel free to send it their way, because we haven't spent any money on advertising yet for the Astrocast, but I'm thinking I might do a commercial at some point in the near future just to kind of test the waters and see if that would bring more listeners in. Because I am getting close to a pretty big threshold for a podcast. I won't get into the specifics of it because, frankly, you guys probably don't want to hear about it. But basically, we're getting close to a point where we'll get X number of listeners, and it can open up some new potential revenue sources for the show. And once that happens, I can advertise more, which is a big thing to bring in more listeners, and then hopefully get more sponsorships, get more interesting interviews. Because right now, when I reach out to people and say, hey, do you want to be on the show, they'll often say, if they say anything at all, who have you had on before, et cetera, et cetera. And for I want to interview all the big tech YouTuber astronomy people. Like, I think it would be awesome to do a show with Quiv, the Lazy Geek. I want to do Trevor from Astro Backyard, Luco Matico. I'm a big fan of his. So all the, various personalities that I would love to have on the show, after we cross these certain thresholds, they are more likely to join because they will know that they're not the only person out there doing it. So feel free to share it with a friend, share it on social media, anything like that definitely goes a long way towards helping the show. And of course, if you want to show your love for the Astrocast in a monetary fashion, you can always go to patreon.com/the Astrocast. Thank you so much. And one last thing before I give you the recommendation for the week and start wrapping things up, I just want to let you guys know I will not be doing a show next week. Unfortunately, I do have to travel for work. I'm going to a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'll be there for the majority of the week. So I just won't have time to record the show. And I thought about recording another one in advance, but I don't like doing that. I like doing these shows more close to real time with you guys, just because I think it feels more real that way. And I don't want to, bank a bunch of shows and then release them, especially if something big happens in the world of astronomy. I want to be able to talk to you about it, the same week that it happens, and not just act like, nothing happened and ignore it because, the show was recorded 2 weeks before it happened. I'm looking at you, Nova and Corona Borealis, whenever you're going to happen. I actually checked, if you somehow haven't heard, there's supposed to be a, incredible nova that's supposed to take place in Corona Borealis, which is a smaller constellation in the night sky, but it's starting to get really close to the horizon shortly after dark. And I know it won't be too much longer because it's right near Boots and Leo, I believe, in between the two. Buddhist, I don't know how you pronounce it, but I always say Boots and Leo, over near Arcturus, over that way in the night sky. And being that it's getting lower and lower, if it doesn't happen, probably within the next couple of weeks, we're probably not going to be able to see it in the Northern Hemisphere, unfortunately. And that would really stink because I've definitely been looking forward to that. But obviously, I know that we can do absolutely nothing to change things that are happening on the celestial scale. So if it happens, then it's great. And if it doesn't, what are you going to do? That just means the folks down in the Southern Hemisphere will be able to appreciate it. And we also have, I think, a possible naked eye comet coming later this month in September. I know, I think it might be the... which one is it? It starts with the T. It's a Japanese sounding name. Suchinan. That's it. Suchinan Atlas, C2023A3. And that's Suchinan Atlas. That might be naked eye visible from what they're saying. I think we're going to have to wait and see. It's still got to survive its close pass with the sun. And then if it does, it'll make its way back around and hopefully we will be able to see it. So we'll see what happens. We haven't had a great comet since Neowise, and Neowise happened right around the time when I was starting to get into astronomy really big, and I didn't know to go out and see it, early in the morning. God, I wish I would have known, because some of the photos I've seen of Neowise are absolutely incredible. The last truly great naked eye comet that I can remember was Hale-Bopp way back in 1994, I believe it was. And that was one that everybody saw. So it was incredible. It was high up in the night sky, and we all saw it for, weeks while it was here. So that was quite the sight. I hope that we'll get to see another one of those in my lifetime. But that's what makes them so special, is that you never know, when you might get the chance to see something that great. And you just don't know. It might get burned up by the sun. It might not get as bright as people anticipated. Or it could be incredible and absolutely blow your mind. And it's just one of the things that I love about astronomy. All right, let's talk recommendations for this week. So I have just a fun one for you this week. It's not astronomy related. I don't know if you guys have heard of Good Mythical Morning before. It's a show that me and my wife have watched together for a long, long time. And the two stars of the show, Rhett and Link, they are basically YouTube famous people. They have basically a daily variety show where they like eat weird stuff and play games, et cetera, et cetera. And I highly recommend Good Mythical Morning if you haven't seen it. But they actually just released a new scripted series. It's a new show. It's on their old channel, which is the Rhett and Link channel, and I'll link this in the show notes, and it's called Wonder Hole. They just released the first 2 episodes. I think new episodes are coming out Fridays, and I believe they said there's going to be a total of 6 this season. It's a really funny show. It's very different. It's creative. It's unique. It's kind of everything that you would never see on regular network television, which I love because I don't watch much network television. I mean, there are a few shows that I watch, but just generally speaking, we don't watch a whole lot of TV, but definitely can recommend Wonder Hole to you. If you haven't seen it, definitely check that out and let me know what you think. All right, guys, I think that is just about going to do it for us this week. I very much appreciate you joining me for this hour. Like I say, I won't be here next week, but we will be back the following week, which will be probably the 17th or the 18th. I try to put the show out Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday at the latest. I apologize that it hasn't always been exact. I've just been super busy with work, so I put it out when I can, and I'm sure you guys understand. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. You have been listening to the Astrocast. I am your host, Roo. I hope that you enjoy this awesome time of year. Get up early, go see Orion if you haven't seen him yet. Check out the Pleiades, check out Taurus, check out the Hyades, and above all, clear skies.